Hello and welcome to another episode of Growing Up B2B. I'm your host, Ed Delia, second generation president of Delia Associates. We are the growth advisory and activation firm focused exclusively on family-owned B2B companies. Today, I'm joined by Caryn Kopp, founder of Kopp Consulting, and the woman many people know simply as Chief Door Opener. For decades, Caryn has helped business leaders and sales organizations secure meetings with some of the world's largest and most difficult to reach companies. Her firm has helped thousands of executives open doors with organizations like Procter & Gamble, Pfizer, GE, Merck, Verizon, AT&T, Target, and many more. She's also the author of 2 best-selling books on business development, a nationally recognized speaker, and serves as a sales messaging coach for scaling up coaches worldwide. Today, we're going to talk about business development, sales messaging, persistence, AI, and what it really takes to build a predictable pipeline of opportunity. Caryn, welcome to Growing Up B2B.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. You and I have known each other for a long time.
Yes, we have. So it's great to have you on. And for listeners who are not familiar with you or with Kopp Consulting, would you take a moment and tell us in your own words what the firm is all about and the types of problems you help clients solve?
Sure. Well, Kopp Consulting is best known for the door opener service. That's why I'm the chief door opener. We have senior level door openers who represent our clients, and we get the big prospect meetings for them. So usually people come to us when they want to get in at the executive level, anything from C-suite to SVP, VP, sometimes director level in some of the larger organizations. And they really need someone to help them. Our clients need someone to help them to get more new opportunities in the top of their sales funnel. And that's one of the most important sales problems that most people need to solve. And they work at it, they try at it, and it's elusive on how to actually solve that problem for the long term. So we offer that solution. So we'll get the big doors open for our clients so they can close more sales.
So why is that? Why would you say so many companies, family governed or not, struggle with that, just getting in the door? Why do you think that's so hard for them?
Yeah, it's a hard part of sales. It's actually the hardest part of sales, bar none, is the getting the doors open. And it's a rare person who loves this part of sales. And I think that's in a blind spot for most of the founders and even the salespeople. They don't realize that there's a certain kind of person. It's really DNA. You can train somebody to be better than they are, but you can't train them to have different DNA. It's a different kind of salesperson. So usually when the founder or the second generation is taking over and they're doing the sales, they're trying to do whatever the first generation did. And they may not have those skills. They may not have that network, and they may not be the right person either. But typically, when that person is sitting in a seat where they can be the subject matter expert and talk to the prospect in subject matter expert kind of language, they can do a pretty good job. But getting that initial meeting is elusive. So it's the wrong person to begin with in most cases. In the cases where somebody is good at it, then they fill their funnel, the top of the funnel, with good opportunities, and they need to close them. And the closing becomes very important. So the eye gets taken off the top of the funnel. And that creates these unnecessary peaks and valleys in revenue creations, which can devastate a business. It's a cash flow problem. So constantly keeping the top of the funnel full is really important. And it can only get done if you have the right person doing the work, and that right person is doing the work right. And that's a lot of rights in there.
Speaking of, and it's very interesting you said that because a longtime client was in yesterday, and a lot of his career was in sales leadership, and he more or less said the same thing. It is a DNA thing. Like he said, you can train up a good salesperson to be great or better. He's like, but if somebody doesn't have the foundational drive or intuitions, it's like, so have you been in situations where you've had to have the hard conversation with a business leader and saying, by the way, the person you have either in the sales role or in a new business development role or in a sales manager role, they're not the right fit for what you're trying to do here. Have you ever found yourself having those conversations?
Yes. And that's one of the things that I promise our clients is that if we notice something that's getting in the way of them being successful, whether it's the person who's having the meeting or the person who we create the meeting for, doesn't do a good job following up, or they can't get to the finish line, or the other people in their sales organization who are tasked with getting the doors open in addition to us, because sometimes we're not the only people who are getting the doors open for our clients. They have their own salespeople too. We will tell the leader of the organization what we're seeing, but then what they do about it is up to them. And it's very, very difficult for people to move off of this limiting belief of one salesperson needs to do the entire sales cycle from getting in the door to closing the sale, even though if you ask them, they will recognize that the people doing the work are not the right people. They don't have the time or they don't have the skills. And even if they have the time and the skills, they would rather put a stick in their eye than do this part of sales. And they know it. They know it, but they may not think about doing something different about it. You talked about the sales leaders, and that's a really interesting place to take this conversation because you have the leader of the whole organization. Sometimes you have a sales leader, and then sometimes you have salespeople too. One of the things I can tell you is that business development, especially this aspect of business development, has changed a lot in the last several years, from before the pandemic to during the pandemic to after the pandemic, even to the last 6 months to a year. It's changed. So if you have a sales leader who hasn't actually done the work of prospecting to actually get the doors open, what's it like to make that phone call to somebody you don't know? What's it like to write that email or 3 emails later, 3 phone calls later? What's it like to do that? What's working these days? I don't know how that leader can help a seller who's struggling. All they could really do is say, book more meetings. And it's like, well, of course, it's not like the seller hasn't thought of that, but they may not know exactly how to get that job done. So who's
Yeah.
helping that person? It's really important that if you want to help that person, pair them up with somebody who's doing it now, who knows what good looks like now in today's day and age, who can actually help that person.
Yeah. It reminds me of well, back in when I used to be a little league coach. Um, and I always hated this. You'd hear that parent from the stands saying to the pitcher who was struggling, just throw strikes. Like, oh, that's it.
Never
Got it
thought of
solved
that.
now.
What great advice.
And I'm walking out to the mound to talk to this pitcher, and a major league pitcher, if they're having trouble, they're doing maybe one thing wrong, and a good pitching coach will key in on that and say, all right, your hand separation's off, or you're not following through on your pitch or your backlight, one thing. With a young, it's like 7 things, and I'm like, all right, I gotta pick one and see if it helps a little. But it's true. It's a lot of times there are, I guess what we're saying is some unrealistic expectations about what can and can't be done, and knowing, hey, have you walked the walk? Do you actually know how to be that coach, that effective coach?
Right. And sometimes the leadership is measuring the wrong KPIs. They'll measure how many calls you make, but never take a look at the quality of each call.
Mm,
But if the quality of the call is off or your messaging is off, it doesn't really matter how many of them you make. The more you make, you're just destroying the reputation of the company if
yeah,
the quality of the outreach isn't right. And
yeah.
that part is important too. So there are things that really need to be looked at and measured that aren't being looked at and measured. I call them the sales effectiveness metrics. That's what
Mm,
we're looking at. Not just how many meetings did you have, but how many meetings you had resulted in second meetings.
yeah,
Because that says a lot
yeah,
about that meeting.
yeah,
Not just that it was with the right person, but it was actually a good discussion. And that discussion it resulted in a second meeting because someone actually asked for the second meeting. So we train our clients actually when we start booking meetings for them before the first meeting occurs and after it was booked. We'll do what we call a mini refresher on what is the structure of that first conversation. What are the high gain questions? What's the path of dialogue? How to be prepared for the answers to those objections, and then how to watch your time. Because if you have a 30-minute meeting, let's say, as a first meeting, by minute number 23, you want to start closing up for next steps and ask for the date and time for the next meeting. Because
Yeah.
if you don't ask for that, you're likely not going to get it. So
Yeah.
we train our client salespeople, and it doesn't really matter how senior they are and the fact that they've been to this rodeo before, but let's do it right because you don't get another shot at that first meeting.
So do you also find yourself in situations, and I know we sometimes do, and everybody's saying, well, we just need more leads.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a misnomer because went through this with a client, like, well, and they did all the math, they're like, okay, we need this many more. And I said, well, you really don't need more leads. They're like, well, yes, we do. See, here's the math. I said, no, you need this many quality leads, right?
Exactly.
Because leads that you can't have an opportunity on, or they're not closable, or they're a wrong fit for the offerings you have, they're not going to, yeah, the number will work, but the output won't work. So do you get into that with a client, Caryn, and early on, do you start talking about let's really be clear about what we're after and maybe set more, pragmatic expectations, if you will?
It's actually the first thing that we do in week one of the first messaging call is we're talking about the who. Because if you nail target, everything else in sales is easier. Everything. In fact, I like to say closing is a simple executional detail of business development done right, which is the title of the book, Biz Dev Done Right, that you were talking about before. But that first piece is, who are you going to target? Who is that exact right fit prospect? Because as dangerous it is and damaging to your close ratio to work on prospects that are the wrong fit, actually even more damaging and dangerous is working on prospects that there are the almost right fit, because it takes a while to realize that they're almost right fit. But if you're very precise about who is the right fit, like you think about that Venn diagram from fifth grade with all the little circles in there, and put in as many of them as you can. Whereas in marketing, you guys go a little bit more broad. In sales and specifically in outreach, we need to go in narrow.
Mm-hmm.
We go in narrow on who will find you to be the obvious solution, who will willingly pay what you want to charge for your products and services, and who's feeling urgency about having a conversation about doing something new, because not everybody will feel urgency. Not everybody who has a problem you can solve is going to spend time and money to solve it.
Mm.
So if you can identify upfront before you put that list together, who really deserves to be on that list, it's not just about who you know, it's about who needs to know you.
Yeah.
Because those sales are going to move more quickly through the sales process and close sooner and will be the right kinds of clients for you. But only if that precision work is done up front. And that is the very first thing we do in week one with our clients is, what is it that we're looking for? What are all the filters, not just about the company, but also about the human in the decision maker role? Are they open to new ideas? Not everybody is. What if you started out with a group of prospects that you could see on their LinkedIn profile that they're winning awards for trying new things? They're part of groups where they're learning things to take their businesses to a different place. Those people are more likely to be open to new ideas. Let's populate the prospect list with those kinds of people, all things being equal, right? And then open up communication with them. So nailing that target is really important. So from an outbound perspective, there shouldn't be anybody on the list who doesn't deserve your time and attention. The list should be right people, current people with phone, email, cell phone. That part of our role is done by our research department. The strategy and the research is done first. And then our clients will take a look at that list. They'll cross off their current clients because we don't want to make a mistake and call them. They'll cross off anybody they're already talking to but hasn't closed yet. And that becomes a clean list for our door opener to pursue. There shouldn't be any surprises there. Every time we get a meeting for our clients, they should be jumping for joy. They see that email come through. It says Thursday at 10, you have a meeting with this prospect. And our client should be thrilled because they know that that's going to be a good client for them. But then there's the precision that I'm talking about, but then there's the discipline. So as the new inbound leads are coming from your efforts and as the referrals are coming in from our clients' efforts, they need to cross-reference that against what they defined as their most current, precise definition of their ideal client profile. And people don't do that. They're so happy to have leads that land in their lap because that means they don't have to do the hard work that we do to go get the new prospects, that they'll work on those leads. And those are the ones that are dangerous because in some cases they're just wrong fit, but in other cases they're the almost right fit that suck up all of people's time. And then they don't end up closing the kinds of clients that they want. And they're left with a bunch of clients that really probably shouldn't have been clients in the first place.
Yeah. Why do you think that's such a hard cycle to break? Because I've seen it too. You've seen it, where, you're sitting back and you're saying, gosh, why are you pursuing that? Because that's probably never going to close. Yet, is it an investment in emotional time and energy up to date? And like, okay, now I just got to follow it through. What is it that when you see somebody pursuing an opportunity or opportunities that by all indications are not a good fit for the organization, not likely to close, yet they continue to bang on that door with the hope? Why does that happen?
Well, I think from the salesperson's perspective, it's easier. Getting in the door with a new prospect is not easy work. And as we've talked about before, most people don't want to do that part of work, which I really appreciate because that's kept us in business for 27 years, right? But they don't want to do that work. So it's easy when something lands in their lap to start working on it. But really, the genesis of this problem is leadership. Leadership needs to set the bar. This is what we're looking for. This is the prospect that we want. The only ones you should be working should check every single one of these boxes, which are the filters by which we're defining the ideal client profile, ICP. And if you start working on one that doesn't meet one of these boxes, you need to come to management and justify it and get approval. But that discipline, I don't see it in any organization that I've provided service for, that I've talked to as a prospect, because they're just so happy to have any prospects to work, because this part of sales is hard.
Yeah.
So, but think of like you only have a certain amount of time in the day. And not all of it is spent on prospecting. Not all of it is spent on sales, especially in a family business. People are often wearing multiple hats.
Sure.
So it's easier to start working something that just comes in and lands in your lap, but it's not going to help the organization.
One of the most, that's a great point. And it reminded me of one of the most dangerous things that I hear an executive say is, well, it's a numbers game. And I'll often kind of redirect that statement. It's a numbers game when the process is quality. Then you can start to look at numbers with some definitive, indication, right? But if the process is poor, all the numbers in the world won't change the outcome.
That's right.
If anything, it's going to skew the numbers, and that's a very hard discipline too, to say you're going to break away from that mentality. It's a numbers game. More leads means more, growth. Well, yeah, if they're right fit leads and the process is optimized to engage them, capture them, convert them, and take really good care of them for a long time, yeah, then it's a numbers game.
Well, it's true. And that thinking permeates many different parts of decision making for senior leadership in these companies, because they'll have a rule of thumb for cost per lead, but cost per lead, as you're saying, like it means nothing. Because if you close 10% of those leads, chances are they were never the right leads to begin with, and you're closing by accident. But you may pay more for a lead, but your closing ratio is higher, and you can close in less time because every single lead is right.
Mhm.
So we measure certain things, these sales effectiveness metrics, and we're looking at how many of those first meetings went to second meetings. And it should be 99.9% because of the reasons I talked about before.
Mhm.
But what percent of prospects you're working are right fit prospects? And people fail on that sales effectiveness metrics. Usually they're low, 25%, 30%, when they look through it with a different lens.
Yeah.
But 99.9% of those should be right fit prospects that anybody is working in the organization. But that's not conventional thinking. But I would argue that somebody's competitors who do think that way are going to eat their lunch.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's easy, I think, sometimes to, and I've seen this in the family governed business, to talk yourself into the fact that, oh, this lead is okay. Oh, this lead can materialize, this could happen, this could happen. So yeah, it's worthy of pursuit when, all indications say it isn't, but it's, sometimes you can talk yourself into believing a truth that's not really true,
Right.
if you stare at
Right.
it long enough.
And if you're doing it methodically, how early in the conversation, like let's say you think that they might be a right fit, how early in your conversations with that prospect can you learn that yes, they are a right fit, or no, they're not? And what do you do if they're not? I think that's another
Mm,
piece that leadership can really help sellers with, because sellers really want to help people. They want to help
yeah.
people solve their problems. But so what do you do if you have somebody who's really not a good fit for you? Do you have a relationship with a different kind of company that maybe does something
Mm,
similar to what you do, who can help them if
yeah.
it's not for you? And maybe
Yeah.
there's a commission that you can get from turning those leads over to somebody else. So it's not like you're completely out, but you get your time back to
Mm,
work on the ones who are right fit.
yeah. 100%. So I know you often talk about messaging before prospecting. Why would you say so many companies spend time, and it's important too to figure out, okay, who are we targeting? What's our list? But then, not enough time saying, okay, how are we going to activate it? How are we going to develop the message that actually does open that particular door? Well, talk about messaging for a minute and why it's sometimes not as fully appreciated at the front end as it should be.
Yeah, so there's messaging, but then there's sales messaging, right? There's a difference between marketing messaging, which people tend to spend time on, their brand, uh, their value proposition, which is a
Mhm.
marketing term, but there's sales messaging. Sales messaging is the spoken word. It's the path of dialogue. It's the answer for the objection that you need to verbalize. It's the voicemail that you leave. It's the email that you write to one person, not email marketing, but the email you write to one individual, and the next email and the next email. That's sales messaging. It's not a script, it's not automation. That's all part of the marketing arena. Sales is one to one. And I
Mhm.
think that's a blind spot for a lot of people too, so that when they do their marketing messaging, they think they've covered off on sales messaging. But that's not the case. You can't stuff a 6 sentence voicemail into live dialogue and expect it to work. You
Mm,
get somebody on a call, they pick up the phone, it's 2 sentences and a question to get them in. But that question, what question you ask, is critical, because if you don't ask the right question, they're going to go down the wrong path of dialogue, or they may just not listen to you at all. And
mm,
people are not prepared for that. So leadership says, I want you to make 20 phone calls in an hour. Well, you could have 20 crappy phone calls where they're calling somebody and they're saying all the wrong things. And then what they will say in the CRM is that the the decision maker wasn't interested. But that may not be true. You just didn't say anything that was interesting. to get them into a conversation. So this sales messaging is a critical part of getting outreach right. So we have the 5 planks of door opening success. I think you've heard me talk about that before. The very first one is the right target, which we covered. The second one is the right sales message. And people don't have that. But why don't they? I think it's in their blind spot. In the early years, when we were doing door opening for people, my clients would say, just start making calls. And it's like, you can't just do that. You have to know who you're calling and what you're going to say. And they did not value that. They didn't understand the value. But the person with the best words wins. I can tell you that in every aspect of sales, not just getting in the door, but even in the meeting, even later on in the sales process, the person who has the best words wins. And if you are a company that is not spending time figuring out what the best words are for the human who's on the other side of your communication, you're going to lose to the company who is willing to spend time doing that.
So you touched on something that I wanted to dig into a little bit more. And I think you cover off on this in one of your books, which is, I think, something that is also maybe underappreciated for sales leadership or sales professionals, and that's overcoming prospect objections. Talk about that for a minute. What's maybe the biggest misconception that selling professionals have about objections and how to overcome them?
I think the biggest misconception is the fact that they're not going to actually get any objections. They walk into a sales situation. It could be a first meeting. It could be contacting somebody and getting them on the phone. And that person says, yeah, well, we have somebody in place and they're doing well. Well, how prepared are you for flipping that around and making that into a meeting anyway? Or if you're in the meeting, flipping that around and creating a situation where the prospect says, wow, I didn't think about it that way. You're right. We do need to have this conversation. And if your answer for that objection is not strong enough to elicit that kind of response, you're not even ready for the sales situation. So I think people just kind of hope that they're not going to hit an objection. And that's probably the biggest misconception, because if they spent time thinking about the other person, as opposed to just thinking about what they want out of this interaction, if they think about what the other person wants, they can pretty much identify any of the objections that they're going to face. And if they can identify the objections, they can also pre-think the answers and then be ready in that sales situation, because that is their performance moment. But most people are not ready for that. They just didn't spend the 3 minutes that it would have taken to figure out what the objections are and how they're going to overcome those objections. That's why I wrote that book, that book is available on my website. The BizDev Done Right is available on Amazon. But the path to the cash, the words you need to bypass those darn prospect objections, I lay out the 10 top objections that prospects typically have when sellers contact them and want to have a meeting. And then I provide the answers. So it's all there. But once you have the answers, you have to practice delivering that, because one formula everybody can remember is language plus delivery equals outcome. What you say and how you say it determines the result. So you can have a bunch of really great responses, whether you develop them or I develop them for you or whatever. But if you're not ready to deliver it in an authentic way that sounds like regular conversation, then you're really not ready for that sales conversation at all. One of the things that we do with our door openers is, aside from creating the messaging and the answers for objections for each of our clients before a program launches, our door opener has to pass a role play with our messaging strategist. Even though our door openers have 10, 15, 20 years experience in business development, it doesn't matter, because if they're not ready, they're not ready. So we test the readiness ahead of time, and we don't practice on our prospects.
Cool. So, you've been at this a number of years. Your own practice has been well celebrated, many acknowledgments, many accolades for the work that you've done. And you've seen, now a few iterations of the rising next generation of selling professional. So as you look at the generation coming up, based on the current environment that they might be selling in, let's say. What do you think are some of the traits that they really need to possess, if different at all from their predecessors?
So one thing they really have to understand is if they are contacting prospects that are 40 years old and up, they need to still do human outreach. Decision makers who I've interviewed, they all say the same thing. They do not want to receive outreach that was written by AI. And even if they think it was written by AI, even if it wasn't written by AI, they will dismiss it and consider it disrespectful. They don't
Mm.
want to be contacted by something that feels like AI. They want to be contacted by a human who has done their research, however they've gotten. Now, AI is great for research and insights, and things like that, perfect for that. But the outreach itself needs to be human and the decision makers will say, if somebody wants a meeting with me, they better do their research. They better say something that was meant just for me. They have to understand that I'm not going to pick up my phone on the first try. I may not respond to their emails, several of their emails. But if they're saying something that is really valuable that I can understand in a few short sentences, I will at some point pick up that phone and have that conversation. But people don't want to spend that kind of time doing the research and crafting something themselves. They'll default to that sequencing that might be
Mhm.
written by somebody else who doesn't understand prospects. And it's a mismatch. It's hard for somebody in their 20s to get a 50-year-old prospect decision maker who's jaded on a call and hold their own in that conversation to get the outcome of the meeting. Because if the decision maker doesn't feel that they're going to get value out of that meeting, they're never going to say yes to it. And that's
Yeah.
why we only employ senior level business developers to do this work of contacting senior level decision makers. That match of seniority is critical to the success when you're trying to sell something that's big or you're trying to sell something to a senior level decision maker. Really critical.
Absolutely. And I think you offered a great takeaway in taking the time for preparation. We have a we have 12 rules of the road here, and one of them is excellent meeting preparation leads to excellent meetings, and that's most
Mhm.
certainly applicable to a new biz dev meeting. Um,
Definitely.
Taking the time. We'll take a little more than 3 minutes. We'll take some real time to understand who is this person, who's ahead of this person, what's at stake, and look at every possible angle so that you know many times over we'll get comments about either something we said resonated or wow, you guys were really well prepared or wow, you're very professional. And it's one more impression that we're leaving on that first meeting. So I think you're right, Karen. A lot of sales professionals, I think they think, especially at a certain point in their career, well, I'm good enough. I can just wing it.
Right.
Well, I've been at this for, a little over 30 years, and I've never known an instance where I was just winging it and it led to a good outcome.
But
So,
a lot of people do wing it. We have a meeting preparation form that if people want that, they can reach out to me. We'll send that of what you need to think about before you go into that first meeting. And then also the time management during that meeting, so that if it is a 30-minute meeting and you need to close up by minute number 23, how are you going to orchestrate that meeting? It's really important. So we give that to our clients, these forms on how to prepare for these meetings, and some of them do, and some of them don't
mhm.
prepare for the meetings. It's unfortunate because it's not easy to get a meeting with an important prospect. So if you have one, it better go well.
Yeah, yeah, you certainly you don't want to blow it if you got one on the line that's a big one. Yeah, you want to do
Well,
everything in your power.
we do warm handoff meetings, which now that most of the first meetings are held by Zoom, even if the second meeting is in person, we are able to be on the meeting with our client. So our door opener will make a really warm handoff and they'll introduce our client to the prospect, remind the prospect why he or she said yes to the meeting, and then we transition the meeting over to our client, which is a very warm handoff. But then my person who's very senior in sales is also there, that if the conversation stalls, they can jump in. If my client doesn't ask for the next meeting, our door opener will ask for the next meeting to make sure that we get the next meeting as a result of the first meeting. And so we weren't able to do that in the early years. I think like 25 years ago, it was all in-person meetings. And so sometimes our client would go and they'd come back and like, how'd the discussion go? And they're like, well, I didn't really get to what I needed to get to. And because they didn't prepare and because they didn't know the right questions to ask. So now we have a whole list of what we call the high gain questions that we arm our clients with. We prepare them for these meetings. We're now on the meetings with our client. We'll even do the follow-up. If our client is not getting to the follow-up, or if a conversation stalls after our client submits a proposal, we'll step back in and get that conversation moving again so they can get to the finish line.
Nice, nice. We did touch on another topic I wanted to go a little deeper on with you, and that's the subject of AI. And certainly in some instances where you've got a younger sales professional in the situation you define, talking to maybe a more senior prospect, anything that looks or feels of AI is probably a detriment. However, AI is most certainly showing up in many facets of certainly the work we're doing on the marketing front, but every industry, it's showing up. How do you see it responsibly showing up in the business development process right now?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways that we're using it that helps the process, but doesn't replace the human outreach. I want to be really clear about that. Human outreach needs to be human. But what we are using it for is to get prospect lists with more filters than a normal prospect list would have. For example, we have an insurance company that targets private schools. And so when we first got started, we're like, okay, insurance company, private schools, that's a pretty wide pool of prospects. And we said, so what kind of private schools find you to be the obvious solution, close faster than others? And what they pursue is private schools with a higher risk profile because they have an insurance product that they can sell that's perfect for that. We're like, okay, great, we can work with this. But Zoom info and looking online, like you're not going to be able to identify which private schools have higher risk profiles. But AI was perfect for that. So we were able to put in, give us private schools that own their own buses, give us private schools where they have these adventure activities like rock climbing or things like that. And we were able to, within minutes, get a list that was like that. And with that list, we were able to go back to some of these other resources like Zoom Info and Seamless and things like that that some people have, and work backwards to find contact information, which we verified against LinkedIn. And then the contact information, phone, email, cell phone. We were able to put all that together where it could have taken 10 hours before to go check every website to see if they have that. Now, so putting together prospect lists quickly with additional filters that are hard to find, AI is very good for that. Insights for what's going on in the industry, what's going on for the individual decision makers. You can use AI to get those insights quickly, but you have to then check that against what makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes AI can give you some crazy things that don't make sense. And you want to make sure that your targeting and your messaging is spot on, because if it's not spot on, you're not going to get that meeting. But that's some of the ways we're using it. Efficiency, putting together an appointment report, because those are administrative tasks that can be done that take time from human outreach. So anything like that from an efficiency standpoint.
So many of the engagements you work on are likely fairly high ticket selling opportunities.
The bigger, the better.
And when they are that, there's certainly the person at the end of the chain on the prospect side who ultimately signs off, endorses, or approves the go forward. But there's also often a series of, I'll call them decision influencers.
Yeah.
Um, and I can attest to firsthand earlier in my career when I was not very attentive to business influencers or oftentimes number two people in an organization. Several times the CEO said yes, but that number two person said no and basically killed the opportunity.
Yeah.
So, as part of your practice, do you dig into that as well with your clients and talk to them? Hey, there's the one person that's your target, but then there's these other folks that are involved in the transaction. So, essentially, checking off and getting buy-in along the way with all those folks that are in the chain. And sometimes it could be a committee, right? I mean, it could be
Yeah.
5, 8, 10 people that are ultimately have to kind of nod their heads and say yes. How do you help people through those more complex selling scenarios?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's actually the first time anybody on a podcast has ever asked me that question. So I'm really glad that you did. We solve it by providing our clients the high gain questions that they can ask. And one of the high gain questions speaks to exactly what you're talking about. And we suggest asking it in the very first meeting. And also, we believe in a top-down approach. So we'll go to the highest level in the organization and open up contact there, the highest level that makes sense. But then, as you say, there are often people underneath them, to the side of them, who can put the kibosh on a sale. And you'll never know it because it all happens behind closed doors, right? So one of the questions that we recommend people ask is, if everything we talk about today is nirvana for you, what is the road to us working together? Who else needs to be involved and what paperwork needs to be signed? So that even if you start with somebody who's under the highest level in the organization, asking that question is a very nice way of saying, does your boss need to sign off on this? And are you truly the decision maker, right? Which you don't want to ask a question that bluntly, but this gets at that information. It
Mm-hmm.
also, with the highest level in the organization, gets at it too. Well, Charlie is going to need to be involved in this, and he's one of my direct reports. And then we're going to need procurement involved in this, and here's the road, and this is the paperwork. Because sometimes you could get started on that paperwork right after the first meeting. You don't have to wait till later
Yeah,
in order to
yeah,
do that. If there's an NDA that needs to be signed, you need to know that. And don't wait till the NDA is signed to get the next meeting. You can get the next meeting while the NDA is being signed, because I've seen people get into that trick basket too. But
yeah.
that question does a lot for you.
It does, and I think a lot of times there is a misnomer, and again, a great dialogue and takeaway here in that, okay, if it's a CEO that you're ultimately, they're the ultimate decision maker. Okay, yes, true. However, if along the way you kind of stepped over number two or number three in that organization who didn't feel that they were given their due, let's say,
Sure.
all right, you still might get the deal, but now you've got somebody on the other side that's looking to kind of cut your legs out from under you any chance they can get because, they were ruffled, right? They were
Mhm.
upset with the decision.
Yeah.
And that's a very difficult position to be in,
And that
irrespective
could
of what you're
even
selling.
It could even happen with somebody's assistant. How
Yeah.
many times we read articles about here's how to get around the gatekeeper? We say befriend the gatekeeper. That person could be your biggest ally. That person sees your decision maker 30 times a day if they're both working in the office. They're on the phone constantly. They're whispering in the ear. They're putting things
Yeah.
in front of them. So the more you can educate that person, the better that person could be an advocate for you and move things forward faster than if you tried to just go around that person.
Oh,
And
yeah.
people don't really think about it that way, but it's important. The other thing I tell people is that if you're passing materials over, whether it's a proposal or an overview or a deck, whatever you're passing over, just make sure that it has what I would call legs and can walk around somebody else's office without you being attached to it. What are they going to do with that? If you forward an email to somebody, you better believe that they're going to forward it to other people.
Hmm.
Is it forwardable?
Hmm.
Do you have like 4 or 5 paragraphs that are dense with words? Nobody's going to read that. If that gets passed to somebody's CEO without bullet points that have 5 or 6 words, you're sunk.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
do that, because you've just prevented yourself from getting to the next step. And then the leaders of the organization really need to inspect what they're expecting their sellers to be doing, because they may be sending things that the leaders would say, no, 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 don't send that. But if you aren't inspecting that process along the way, how do you know what the sellers are doing?
Mm, true, true. So if you walked into a company tomorrow to evaluate its sales organization, what are the top things that you look for now before even making a single recommendation? What puts your antenna up?
So the first thing is, I'm asking, how much time are people spending weekly pursuing new prospects? That's what I want to know,
Mhm.
because usually it's maybe, 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week, which is really not enough to make a difference. And I'll ask, why is that happening? And they're usually busy working on other things. And then I'll ask them, how big is a year one and a year two deal worth to you, and lifetime value of a new client? Because a lot of times people will tell me that a new client can be worth $100,000, $500,000 to them over the lifetime value of the client, but yet they're spending so little time actually pursuing them. Well, we can really help there,
Yeah.
because we can accelerate that, the top of the funnel being full. So I'm interested in knowing that. I want to know their close ratio, because if their close ratio is low, it's likely they're working on a lot of the wrong fit prospects, or the almost right fit prospects that become a trick basket. And we can really help them improve that close ratio if we're working on the right prospects for them.
Mm. And I love the almost right fit prospects takeaway. That one is terrific because, it's certainly easy to see how organizations can get tripped up there and, waste a lot of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so as you look to the future, and you've been at this a long time and are continuing to help so many people be more effective in engaging with meaningful prospects, what's exciting you right now, Caryn, about the future of business development?
What's exciting me? What's exciting me about this? I don't know. I mean, it excited me all the way throughout, really. There's so much opportunity out there for people, so much opportunity. They just have to do a couple things right.
Mhm.
That's it. It's a couple things right. One of them may be hiring us to do the door opening for them. That could be one of the right things. But if they're not going to do that, they need to do the right things for themselves with the door opening. And then the opportunities are endless, endless. The bar for good outreach is so low. People are just not doing the right things out there to help the decision makers say yes to these meetings. So I think that's what excites me. And it makes me feel sad too, because there are so many people who are missing these opportunities and wasting their time by not doing the right thing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm starting to see it show up a little bit in academia, not a lot yet, but I really would hope that there'd be more educational institutions that are really teaching selling as a discipline, as a science, as an art, in a more serious and meaningful way. Because I think like so many professions, young people don't wake up and say, I want to sell, always. However, they find themselves in sales roles because of certain aptitudes and, maybe don't have the best training or resources or knowledge or
Right.
process, and they're just kind of finding their way through trial and error,
Yeah.
when, clearly with resources like yours, there is a better way.
Yeah, there's a better way. And you bring up a really good point too, because when I went to a business school undergrad, and I have an MBA too, and there was only one sales class, and it was sales management. Well, guess what? You don't come out of college to 22 years old in sales management. So there was really no information. Now, from that first job that I had in sales, we were put through the Xerox sales training program.
Mhm.
And their training really starts with the first meeting. A lot of structured sales training starts with the first meeting, but not necessarily how to get that
I
meeting.
get it. Yeah.
And there's a process to that. But if you don't get in the door for the first meeting, you don't get to do anything else in sales.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, So it's we often tell clients, whether it be sales, marketing, or business development, take a little more time now so that you don't have time later. Because if all you have is time as a selling professional, something's going wrong.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's very true. That's a good point.
So, Caryn, we could probably talk for hours, if not days. But I do have to wrap up here. So last question. If any of our listeners wanted to connect and learn more about Kopp Consulting or check out your books, what's the best way for them to find you and connect with you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is Caryn Kopp, CarynKopp. Please come to our website, which is koppconsultingusa.com, Kopp consultingusa.com. Check out the door opener page. That's what we're talking about with this outsourced service. Connect with me on LinkedIn. BizDev Done Right is available because a lot of people do it wrong. So BizDev Done Right is the name of the book. It's available on Amazon. Or you could get the Path to the Cash, the words you need to bypass those darn prospect objections on our website.
Awesome. Well, to wrap up, Caryn, what's really standing out is, and thank you so much for sharing your perspectives, but it's really not about clever scripts or gimmicky tactics or high pressure sales. It sounds like you're all about creating meaningful conversations, but with the right people, and ultimately delivering that message that genuinely resonates and consistently showing up prepared and showing up with value. For our family-owned business listeners, so many important reminders today, but really, growth rarely comes from waiting for that phone to ring. It comes from intentionally opening up new doors. So Caryn, thanks again for sharing your story, your perspectives. Again, we've been speaking with Caryn Kopp, founder of Kopp Consulting and the chief door opener. And I'm your host, Ed Delia. And this has been another episode of Growing Up B2B. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Caryn, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning into Growing Up B2B. To explore more episodes and insights, visit podcast.delianet.com. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating or review on your podcast platform of choice. Having worked with hundreds of family-led businesses across my career, and being a second-generation leader myself, I'm on a mission to help every family business I meet achieve next-level growth for their organization. So feel free also to connect with me on LinkedIn and let's support each other. You can also find out more about my company at delianet.com. Again, I'm your host, Ed Delia, and thanks so much for joining us today. Take care.